going to begin recording as well. So you're here today to focus with us on education across the issue areas, across all of the intersectional responses to COVID-19 and to the racial justice uprisings of this year. We know that big decisions are being made, and these decisions, the policies and plans being formed right now are really laying the groundwork. Will this unprecedented moment, this crisis year that we've had, will this lead to dealing with the systemic inequalities, the disparities that have come to the forefront, or will we in this moment fail to make that real progress? And so I'm very happy to welcome, to look through those issues with us, three wonderful advocates and leaders in the area of education. We welcome Dr. Dia Bryant, who is Deputy Director at the Education Trust New York. Thank you for joining us, our probably furthest afield participant. And we welcome Sam Radford, who's a longtime parent advocate in Buffalo with quite a few affiliations that I welcome Sam to share, and directing school and parent projects. And Sam also shared with us at the start, he's gonna dart off at the end to host his regular radio show, We the Parents, I think it's called. So much focus on parent and the well-being of students and families. And then of course, Jessica Bauer-Walker, our anchor partner and executive director of Connect, who is also the president of the Buffalo Public Schools Parent Community Health Worker Association as well. So thank you again, all three of you, for joining us. And just so you all have a little shape of our next hour and a bit together, we're going to ask just a few rounds of questions to our speakers today, based on some of the key themes of this moment. Then we will have time for questions and discussion with all of you. We will also have a bit of space to go out into breakout groups and ask you to discuss and reflect on what you've just heard, and then come back together for a quick wrap up. So to dive right in, I think this, we were even just saying before the call, what's happened today? What do we need to know, right? What's happened today? Because this is all unfolding hour by hour, as so many of these issue areas are right now. So, I think it's important to start today knowing that the decisions being made, the plan at the moment is still evolving, but the equity that we need, the priorities that we have, we know what those are. So we're going to start out with our first round of questions for our speakers, looking at the urgent, the short-term needs up front, and of course, thinking about reopening plans. So Dia, again, of the Education Trust, your organization has been reviewing school district reopening plans in some of the state's largest school districts, and based on an equity criteria. So can you tell us, what are you looking for in reopening plans when you do that analysis? And so far, how is Buffalo's plan measuring up?
So yes, we are an equity organization, and much of what we actually looked for in reopening plans has a lot to do with where we stand in terms of our values. We know that prior to the pandemic, there were very clear inequities that many families and students experienced. However, what COVID-19 actually did was actually affirm for those who were actually experiencing the inequity that there actually was inequity, and sort of introduce to others, hey, this is what we've been going through. It also exacerbated many of the inequities that already existed in the system. So we think about what sort of we were thinking about before. Our system is broken. How do we help students of color, those with disabilities, multilingual learners? How do we make an education system that is equitable for them? And so we looked at reopening plans, and we thought of actually only 8 big buckets of criteria. But within those 8 buckets are actually 28 indicators. And Buffalo's plan was analyzed last week by myself and another teammate. And we actually have it posted on our website. And there are some strong things, and there are definitely some areas for growth, as I'm sure you know. What we were really looking for was instructional continuity. Do all students have access to a teacher every day? Meaning, do they get lessons, right? Sort of in your traditional math, ELA, but also in art, science, and social studies. Are they getting live lessons? Do they actually interact with a person. We're also looking for, if they are having virtual lessons, is there technology made available from the district, and what efforts the district makes to make sure that technology is available to both students and to teachers. And by technology, I mean not just the devices, but also sort of broadband if that's necessary. We also look to see how districts were re-engaging students who did not engage in the spring. So we know that a lot of students just were not able to log on, given some of the complexities. People experienced loss, just organizing your home. I don't know, I have 2 kids, and just getting everybody organized while I was still trying to work is just a lot. And they weren't able to log on all the time, and sometimes they disengaged. So how is the district making an effort to re-engage those families and re-engage those students? How are they making space for the unique needs and services, particularly OT, PT, speech, for students who have disabilities? So those are some of the areas that we were thinking about, along with some of the typical areas we were looking for before regarding meal access, and really discipline, course access. So that's a bit of a high level explanation of what we were looking for.
Great, thanks so much, Dia. And we've put the link to that Buffalo analysis in the chat, so folks are welcome to click through that too. Sam, I know that you have expressed concerns about inconsistencies in learning and student engagement, how difficult it proved during the remote learning period this spring. So we're curious, now as we're moving quickly toward reopening, what are your priorities?
So first of all, thank you, Andrea, and the whole Anchor crew, for this is a really great, platform and forum that you have. And so, yeah, listening to parents, the most thing that stood out the most was just the inconsistency. Some parents felt like things were great. Some parents felt like things were terrible. And then when you listen to students, you found out that same thing. Some students felt like they had too much work. Some students felt like they had no work. You know what I'm saying? And so we saw that whole range when we went remote. And just to be very fair, I don't want to take this out of context. I don't want nobody later on to say that we were attacking the district or anything like that. Just to be really fair, we all know this happened abruptly, and it was not in any kind of way something that we were prepared for. So it took time to make the change. But to the point Dia made earlier, obviously we already were dealing with a huge achievement gap before. We were already dealing with all the inequities before. So now what this did is this basically exacerbated them. And so now here we are where, if we want to be real fair about this, if we look on one hand, there were a group of students who, when this happened, they were able to just switch over to virtual learning and continue at the pace that they were learning. Nothing changed. And then we have our students, by and large, who now had to go through all this process of change, which means that they were just falling further and further behind. So we could at least afford the inconsistencies, and that's what we were dealing with. So obviously, the number one priority has to be a health and safety issue. So don't take what I'm going to say out of context. I know that. Parents by and large said they are not sending their children to school because they are concerned about the health and safety issues, right? But my concern, and what I'm saying has to be a priority, is what are our children learning? And that's really what, and the question is, were they really learning even before this happened? You know what I'm saying? There was a challenge before, now the challenge is even the more. And so what we want to do is, the top priority for us is consistent with what Dia said, is, where our children learn every day, where our children be taught by a teacher every day. That is the top priority. And will they be learning? And again, in the context of their safety, in the context of everything that's going on with their parents, but at the end of the day, in the education system, what we want is our children educated. And that is a real concern about our ability to do that and not fall further behind. And that's really what the issue is. And that's why we see, if anybody saw the front page of Buffalo News last Friday, you saw that the private schools are going to school every day in person, and they are going to continue to provide the same education that they've been getting. So they're going further and further ahead. And so we have to take this moment. I'll wrap it up with this. To me, this is a critical moment where we all have to come together and all of us have to fight for all of us all of the time. We have to turn the corner from how we have been doing education in this country, and we have to figure out a way with this opportunity for us to be there for each other in a way that we service, come up with an education model that meets all of our needs. And if we listen to each other right now, listen to everybody, and no two people situation is exactly the same, it becomes important to listen to the needs of individual parents and individual students and putting together a plan and a model that meets all of our needs.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I think that's such an important piece to hold as we are all so anxious and nervous. This is a huge challenge, and it's also a huge moment of opportunity. And I know that's a point that Jessica has made, so I want to turn it over to you, Jessica. You've really stressed the need, as Sam just commented as well, for reopening plans to meet the needs of parents and families who are in very different situations. Can you tell us more about that, please?
Sure. Really appreciate what my colleagues here have shared, Dr. Dia and Sam, around the equity issues here. And I think Buffalo Public Schools in particular, and the Western New York region in general, has such a diverse population, right? We have one of the top schools in the entire country, like City Honors, and the demographics there are very, very different than many of the other schools in the district. So when we have, 30,000 plus students, as a parent advocate, I do my best to try to represent the diversity of the parents that I advocate for and that I represent. But it takes a lot of work, and I really want to affirm what Sam was saying too. This is not about saying, we recognize this is very challenging for Buffalo Public Schools and all school districts, as it is for all of us. And it takes real intention and community collaboration to make sure that all voices are heard. So when we're talking about, Dia had lifted up the fact, we're trying to work while we're parenting, right? Making sure that we find times and spaces and ways for working parents who are trying to work and raise their kids and support academics to share what some of those challenges are, because we're very short on time. Some of our parents that are working with children with special needs have been incredibly stressed during the pandemic. They really need in-person and professional support, right? So how do we make sure that we give them the time and the space to share what their unique needs and challenges are? We have a very high multilingual English language learner, immigrant, and refugee population in Buffalo. There's a lot of work that's required to make sure that those voices are heard, everything from operational pieces like translation and interpretation to, again, setting up platforms and having trusted folks to bring them into these spaces. So we want to make sure that parents have voice, that parents have choice as much as possible in line with public health guidance. And I also want to lift up the fact that we need to hear from our students too. I know that our students are really struggling. We as parents and caregivers are struggling. I know I've got many of my community partners that are doing phenomenal work to support young people right now and amplify their voices. And I'd like us to, as a community, also to find ways that we can make sure that our student voices and experiences are heard as well, because they're the most direct stakeholders in this situation.
Thank you so much. So actually our second round of questions, I would love each of you to zoom in on what Jessica started raising there. So this issue of how can we center students and families, and how important their voices, their leadership has been in the past and can be in this moment. So Jessica, to go to you first this time, we know that parent and family involvement is not just a box to check. Family and community advocacy has created already policy changes in Buffalo Public Schools and other school districts in the past. So can you give us an example or two that shows the importance of that role for parents and families to play in school policy making?
Sure. Well, I learned from the best when I came into parent advocacy about 10 years ago. I worked directly with Sam and my colleagues at the District Parent Coordinating Council. The DPCC and the Special Education Parent Advisory Group were kind of the two parent groups in the Buffalo schools at the time. Now we have 5 officially recognized parent groups. But we have made quite a bit of progress since that time. I remember at that time when I was first getting involved, we couldn't even get into school buildings. There wasn't even visitor entrances marked. We had to advocate to like literally set our foot in the building. Now we have community schools and parent centers and a much more robust effort to really engage families in the community. And that's a lot because of, district leadership, Say Yes, being involved here, a lot of community collaboration and support. I think sometimes folks don't recognize or forget that there was extremely consistent and assertive parent advocacy back in those times, right? We were constantly meeting, advocating, going to every single Board of Education meeting, just doing lots and lots of work to make sure that our voices were heard and highlight those issues. Sam can talk a little bit more about the specifics of those things, but we would work through the system. We filed multiple complaints. There's a mechanism that's in place with the New York State Education Department called a 310 appeal, and only a parent can file that on behalf of your child. So as we found ways that we could build power, we were told a lot of times, no, that's not what's right. We're doing our best. And we would document. We found lots of allies. We have some academics and attorneys, many of our partners that are on this call or that have continued to work with us in this moment here. And it really was a community collaboration to center the voices and experiences of parents and students. And we had multiple wins. Things got all the way up in terms of civil rights issues to the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. So again, I'll let Sam and Dia talk a little bit more about some of those other aspects. But I do want to lift up the fact that parents were doing so much of that work, meeting on a consistent basis, educating ourselves, learning about policy and law, talking to colleagues locally and elsewhere. And as Sam said, fighting for all of us, right? Thinking about what we're dealing with as kids, but really working on understanding that if your kid isn't okay, my kid isn't okay. We want to make a system and a structure where every single one of our schools in our school district, our kids can be healthy and safe and supported, that there's not good schools and bad schools, that we have a good, strong system in place.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Yeah, so the expertise, the knowledge is out there in our parent networks and can make schools stronger. And Dia, to turn it back to you, the Education Trust New York released earlier this summer, reopening stronger equity priorities for this fall. And in this list of equity priorities is improving engagement and communication with parents and families, and is also ensuring transparency. So what are the key steps school districts can take to include and partner with families during this time and to meet those goals?
So, there's one real opportunity that sort of COVID-19 and the pandemic school closures have handed us. Many of us in the equity space and sort of the race workspace, sorry, that's the 4-year-old, have talked about dismantling the system for ages. We've talked about, we need to deconstruct, we need to dismantle. It's been dismantled for us, right? And so now is the time that we make deposits, right? That we sort of put out there what we need. And as I think about this moment and how so much of our airtime is being consumed with, are we virtual or are we in person? I'm thinking more and more about personalized education and the opportunity to provide every child with exactly what they need in the context that they need, because context matters. And I say this because I was a teacher, I was a principal, I'm an educator, period. And for years, we've watched teacher education sort of tell teachers, teach to the middle, and there's always sort of these kids on both ends that are high performing, that could take more, right? And we want those in the advanced coursework. That's why the Education Trust pushes sort of, we need course access. And we have these other students who are always left behind, and inevitably, those end up being our Black and brown families, our low-income families, our families who do not know how to advocate for themselves. So now is the time that I think those like Jessica and Sam, who are leading the charge of being, activist parents, start to sort of put some words out there into the mouths of folks who are actually making the policies. And they need to know it's time to personalize education. It's time to think about who we're serving and what they need. And this is the opportunity to do that. I think virtual learning gives us that in a way that no other learning style does. when you are actually able to literally engage with students one-on-one, or 20-on-1 in a Zoom room. It's a little bit more intimate in a way. So that's sort of where I'm thinking a lot about, is sort of individualized learning for everyone, and how do we push that?
Wonderful, thank you so much. And we encourage Dia on these anchor calls, all the little child voice interruptions that we can get in the background, so don't worry about that. Sam, on this same theme for you, what steps would you like to see here in Buffalo to really center the concerns and priorities of students and families this fall? And of course, as Jessica shared, you have so much, a whole list of parent advocacy stories, I'm sure, from here in Buffalo. And as we turn it over to you too, some folks have been adding into the chat, our partner, Dr. Renee Kadzow, the big list of issues that Buffalo Public Schools parents and students have successfully advocated around in the past. But Sam, please.
Yes, so first of all, let me just say it in one word: transparency, transparency, transparency. And I'm saying that word because I think Jessica, did a really, covered a very, very important point. We have to understand history, how we got here. It was so, as good as it is now, it has a lot of work. It still needs a lot of work. But like she said, when we started, they stopped you at the front door and you had to get escorted to, anywhere in that building. I mean, we parents didn't have a say-so. Period. When I went to my first parent meeting at MLK school, the principal told me he decided who was going to be the PTO president. He said, I decided so-and-so is going to be the PTO president. They just decided for us who was going to represent us. I mean, that's how we started to be engaged. And they said what we could do is we could do baked good sales and we can do, this and that, but we didn't have no role in the decision making. And so we were really fortunate. We had a guy named Lloyd Hargrave who really helped us understand right from the beginning. We had rights as parents, and under no circumstances did we have to be relegated to doing baked good sales. And so we learned what Section 1118 of No Child Left Behind at that time, which is ESSA now. We learned what Commissioner's Regulation 100.11 on school-based planning, shared decision-making was. We learned what District Policy 3170 was, that gave us rights as parents to be involved in the decision-making for our children. So we made a lot of progress. So parents have a seat at the table now, are in the conversation, but we are not really being listened to yet. You know what I'm saying? Having a seat at the table is the beginning of the process, right? Being listened to is ultimately where you're trying to get to. Being partners, full and complete partners of where you're trying to get to. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. I don't want to go into the full history because some of those fights required us suing the district. Some of those fights required us freezing, money because here's the issue. They did not want to partner with parents. I mean, they just wanted to operate the system the way they was operating the system. So partnering with parents should be something that we think should just be a given. And that just was not the case historically. And it's difficult even now, right? And so even though we want to give the appearance that, we want to partner with parents, that's just, the way an equal partner should be functioning, that's not taking place. So here's where I think it starts at most importantly. Let's talk about something simple as, what did we learn from virtual instruction last year? What happened? Do we have the data on what happened? Why should that be, we asked for some of that data and it was essentially told to us that, that it would embarrass the district. So they didn't want to put out information that would embarrass the district. And so we said, what are we talking about here? These are our children we're talking about. We want some baseline data on what worked and what didn't work. How can we inform decisions that we got to make going forward if we don't get the baseline data? And nobody's out here trying to embarrass anybody. We all here are trying to work for everybody. This district has historically worked well for the prepared parent. So for the parents who are prepared and have the resources and support, everything you need is there. What we need is all of us to come together to fight to make sure that all of us are getting everything we need. And what happens is generally, those of us whose needs are met, it becomes difficult to fight for people whose needs are not met. And we just kind of want the system to keep working because our needs are being met. And so what our challenge is to say that it's not an education system unless everybody gets educated. And if everybody's not getting educated, we can't sit by passively and watch and be satisfied with 20 and 30% of our kids reading, writing, doing math on grade level, 65% of our kids graduating on time. We gotta really talk about how do we, to the point Dia made, we gotta get to the place where we come up with an individualized instruction plan that educates every child. And I think right now, in order for us to do that in this moment, we need transparency.
Thank you so much, Sam. And for our third round of questions, I think that's again a perfect transition from Sam. We want to focus on what, for these three speakers, are the policy priorities that can build long-term equity. So as we said at the start, the choices being made now will chart a long-term course for the future. And so we'd like to ask each of you, what are a couple equity-driven education policies that should be adopted or implemented now? And I think I'll let you three jump in as you wish, in the order that you wish. So what are a couple equity-driven education policies that should be adopted or implemented now? Maybe I won't let you jump in as you wish. Jessica, go.
Okay. I think that we have folks that can talk on kind of different levels, and it's important to see, where we can make action locally, statewide, and federal. We hear a lot of times, I think this is one of our challenges, that so much of what school districts are able to do have to do with state and federal mandates. And while that's true to some degree, there is a lot that we can do locally. And we have actually had a history in Buffalo Public Schools with our parent and student and community advocacy of making some pretty significant changes by learning more about those policies and figuring out how to creatively adapt them. So my work has been, as a parent community health worker, and when I first got involved with the District Parent Coordinating Council, I was the health committee chairperson. And I was just shocked with, my kids coming into school and being young. When my daughter was in kindergarten, I said, when is recess? And I was told, oh, there's no recess, only pre-K gets recess. And that seemed insane to me. I couldn't understand how that could be. And my daughter immediately, being very active little girl, started to have behavior issues and trouble focusing because there was no recess. And then I found out that they only got physical education or gym, as we call it in more common language, once a week. So we've got 5-year-olds here that are, getting physical activity maybe once a week. And then I started to look at the food, highly processed food, really, not very healthy. I started to look at, the ways that discipline was being used and, were they doing social emotional learning and using calming techniques. At that point, there was nothing around, trauma-informed care or restorative practices in the language that we see now. So that was the place that we were in. And as Dr. Renee Cadzo had posted before, our colleague, Assunta Ventresca, who no longer works for the district, but was the director of health-related services at the time, shared with us this tool called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And we were going to Board of Education meetings and, talking at our schools about like, the kids need more physical activity, the kids need to eat healthier. The older kids engaged in lots of high-risk behaviors, the things that we were seeing with risky sexual behaviors and violence were really troubling. So we got the district to do this youth risk behavior survey, and then we had actual quantitative data, right? We had a tool that showed us that the parent experience was validated by real data that students had reported extremely high rates of risky behaviors, ranging from poor eating habits to limited exercise, high screen time, engagement in violence. A lot of students reported issues at home with living in environments that were far from safe and healthy, or had seen, lots of instances of violence out in their communities. So from that point, we had good data to start to advocate, and it really was an effort of many of the folks that are in this meeting today, a lot in centering with parents and students, saying this is the kind of district that we want to see, and writing a wellness policy. The district also has a really innovative code of conduct dealing with some of those other types of issues related to how we manage behavior. And both of those policies have actually won multiple awards on a state and national level. So we have made lots of progress. We've done lots of innovative things. I know our time is short, so I won't get into much more of the details, but once that wellness policy was implemented, we went in and started to advocate for, what could we do first? Recess, what can we do next? Physical education, what can we do after that? We've gotten a condom availability program. We've gotten lots of things through that wellness policy and continue to sustain action. And so I think that there are ways when you advocate and when you have diversity of thinking and bring in partners to really support what parents and students are looking for, that we can make real practical change on a building and district level.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And, it's so important that I think in this moment too, sometimes it's implementing the policies that have already been very hard won that's important to the moment. So I'm going to put in the chat a Buffalo News piece that Jessica and Renee, who's also on our meeting today, published last week on implementing the wellness policy and the code of conduct, as Jessica just mentioned. Sam, will we turn it to you for policy priorities for implementing now, adopting now? And I see some questions are starting to come into the chat too. Feel free to add your questions. After this last round, we'll turn to those.
Yeah, so to Jessica's point, there's so many things that we were already working on that, we really need to just stay with to get to full implementation. Obviously restorative practices becomes a critical a part of, dealing with the whole exclusionary discipline. It's not obviously as much of an issue in a virtual learning environment, but we still we went through this process of getting this code of conduct, but we haven't fully funded it. We haven't made sure all the resources are there. So to get policy is only the beginning. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people don't understand that you can get a policy and don't end up with regulations for the implementation of policy, and then you don't end up with a budget to be able to, fund the implementation of policy. So, we get policy wins, but parents learned a long time ago that a policy win by itself don't get you anywhere. So we got to have that second and third level of conversation, so that we don't. And the other thing that I think is critical, and I know you only asked for one, but this is a conversation that sometimes becomes difficult for us to have, but we got to come to terms with the fact that Buffalo is one of the poorest cities in the country. You know what I'm saying? Buffalo is also one of the most segregated cities in the country. That's just the truth of the matter. And so when we start talking about anti-racist policies and practices, it means something different here. When we have to deal with the fact that the vast majority of our teachers do not live in the situation that our students live in. You know what I'm saying? So that's the dynamic that's going on in the classroom. And if we don't have real courageous conversations and come up with policies that protect our students, from, the biases that people have. I'm talking about these is not, I don't want to get into an intentional thing, but I really want to make it clear that we have to really have courageous conversation to get to a place in Buffalo that will, allow us to turn a corner. And I think our situation is a little bit more intense than it might be in other places in the country.
Thank you, Sam. And of course, we'll turn to you, Dia, on this as well. A couple policy priorities for this time.
Okay, so I'll spin right off of Sam's last point. For me, both as a parent and an educator who is from Detroit, Michigan, and spent my entire career teaching in Brooklyn, I am incredibly passionate about students being able to see themselves in the content that they learn, and particularly our Black students. When you look at a place like Buffalo that is, 83% students of color, and you look at a 6th grade curriculum for social studies, which is sort of world cultures, and not once do they see what it was like to be indigenous on this soil, or what it was like to be brought here in the transatlantic slave trade. And they learn about that when they become adults. You feel betrayed. And it is the responsibility of schools to show children themselves and let them develop their identities. And right now there is a bill in Albany that is looking to amend the education law and put African-American history into classrooms. I think that's one. A really big one for me too is around gifted and talented education and course access at the high school level. Dr. Yvette Jackson, who is a New York native, wrote about the culture of the pedagogy of confidence. And this idea is that every child should be treated as a gifted and talented child. I don't understand why we continually, take four-year-olds and try to sort of sieve them and sort them into who has the potential and who does not. And really, it actually has a lot to do with our adult expectations. And so policy-wise, I would like to see, especially in this world where we sort of are not in physical space, us rethink how we sort of split children off. If my school offered gifted and talented or AP algebra and we're virtual, hey, it doesn't matter. I can show up on the Zoom link no matter where I am. So this is an opportunity to make those types of things available to everyone. Those are two that are hitting me really hard these days, Andrea.
Thank you so much. And we'll put in the chat too, the Education Trust Reopening Stronger kind of platform that lists priorities as well. But now, friends, with big thanks to our speakers, it's time to turn to your questions. We've had a couple come in through the chat. We'd love to have Blythe, if you'd like to, feel free to unmute yourself and ask these questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to lift them up for everybody listening here too.
Yeah, thank you for this great session. Good to hear from from our wonderful panelists. I really value your voices. I wanted to better understand how parents are currently advocating for your needs around after-school support and childcare support as these plans continue to evolve. I've been on lots of phone calls and in meetings where those conversations are happening. And we want to make sure that there's connection here. So I would love to hear from you either on this call or outside of this call is one question. And then the other question, and I will be completely honest, I haven't had time to read the plan. I just printed it. I'm hoping to read the district's plan this weekend. I'm curious about student voice. I couldn't agree more. I think that we don't think about our young people enough, and they are so important because they are our future. They are their own future, and they have great ideas, and they live this. And so I'm really passionate about that, and I'm just wondering how their voices are being brought into this conversation at this critical time. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Blythe. So I will share briefly around the child care issue. It is a huge one. I think you've heard from several of our speakers. We're struggling with this alongside so many of our parents. There is an Erie County Child Care Task Force, just for folks to be aware of it, and it's being chaired by Deputy County Executive Maria White and Department of Social Services Commissioner Marie Cannon. So they're working closely with the Child Care Resource Network. I have certainly been advocating on that issue. I know when I was on the family and community meeting that the Buffalo Public Schools hosted on Monday, there was many parents who were weighing in, asking questions around this issue. I think it's something that we really need to engage in some deep community planning on. I know Dia had mentioned some issues around this before, and the district can't do that alone, right? That's not the district's capacity. The district has had after school programming and community schools, but how are we as parents, and especially those of us that are single parents, going to work and have our kids at home? I know lots of parents who have left their jobs, kids that have been left in unsafe situations because parents have to work. So I think that what I've heard from other parents, what I'm experiencing, what I'm hearing from leadership in our community is that this is something that needs to be worked out. If anybody wants to work on this issue, feel free to weigh in on the chat. You can chat me privately or just put it into everybody, and I'll work to engage folks, because it's a big issue that we need to really start having more conversation and planning on.
No, thank you. I'm on that task force, so I thank you very much. And there's a process right now where we're trying to gather the information from the providers to really understand what their capacity is. And from there, hopefully bring that information in partnership to the district in order to meet these critical needs. I don't have young kids anymore, but I have a son who's a college student, and I know that's a challenge too, in a different way. So I really appreciate the challenges that families are going through right now. And I hope that we can find resources and a way to support people as they need it, because it's essential.
Great, thank you. So we'll keep talking about that. And then in regards to the student voice, and I don't know if Dia and Sam have things to say about this, but I do know that we have Dina Thompson from the Erie County Restorative Justice Coalition, and they've been doing a lot of work with us to try to lift up student voice. Wondering if Dina wants to make a quick comment to that point.
So thank you so much. Thank you, Andrea, Anchor Team, for just having this conversation. And thank you for all of those who are bringing up that student voice. Since COVID, we have been very passionate about raising the student voice and providing places and spaces for them, virtually, of course, to voice their concerns. And in doing that, we have 2 youth who are capturing the voice of the youth right now, and to seeing how this COVID and the racial tension within our country is impacting them. And so that being said, I love this idea of getting the right voices at the table to create policies, because this is the voice that has been ignored and the voice that has been most impacted by both of these situations that are happening right now. And so what we are learning is that kids are scared. And then there is that inequity on the education that some students are receiving. There are some students, as Sam pointed out, who are, love this learning virtually, but there are the majority of the students who are really, really struggling, and parents struggling with the students in order to educate them, because there are some struggles within our cities with the parents meeting the expectations of teaching and knowing the information themselves. And so that's been a struggle. But we keep talking about this education aspect of it, but the loneliness that our students are feeling is not being addressed at all. They have been isolated, they haven't seen their friends, and so that social emotional learning, that trauma that they're impacting, they have no one to process it with. And thank you, Sam, for bringing up that restorative practice, because restorative practice isn't just about addressing harm that has happened, it's about building those strong communities with people. And many of these communities have been broken with our young people, and that needs to also be considered in the policies that we're looking at, like how are we connecting students moving forward. And I'd like that to be part of the policy, or part of what we're bringing forth to the school board, is like, how are we reconnecting our students? Because even the plans and policies that I'm seeing in ECRJC, we're working with 5 different schools right now, using restorative practice to integrate people back into schools in a healthy way, and also for healthy staff. But this, the way that they're setting up the engagement of students is also traumatizing. And so not being connected with students and having masks on your face, and no one's even addressing even the way that we think is a healthy way to bring students back. And that's another concern that students are having. So I just kind of want to bring that, and that is not my voice, that is the voice of students. So I just kind of wanted to bring that and make that voice here as well. So thank you, Jessica.
I placed it in the chat, but I did want to name that there were a few very strong parts of BPS's reopening plan, and this may be a perfect sort of momentum building space. One of them was the professional learning that they intend to provide to teachers around sort of the trauma-informed work, the restorative practices, ways in which to engage students upon returning. It was very, very well done, and it's one of the parts that we actually highlighted as a good practice. They also do a really good job of thinking about leveraging community partners. They actually list the partners in the plan. So some of them may be your organizations or organizations that you know well. So that may be a nice conduit to make some connections and push toward what you're actually looking for.
Great.
Thank you. That's really great. Thank you so much.
We are mindful of our time, friends, because we want to move you into breakout rooms. I do want to give a chance if there's one more very urgent question or something that someone wants to unmute and pose for our panelists. We can take time for one more question, and then we will move toward our breakout rooms.
Hi, this is Broderick Kaysen from Univera, and I intend to talk with Sam about this offline, but I too kind of read, not word for word, but several bits and pieces of the school's plan, and I guess I'm a little concerned about the removal in some cases of the nurses from the schools. So, I mean, this is a pandemic. So this has a really strong healthcare piece that hasn't really been ever that closely connected to the education system as I believe that it needs to be now. And that being said, I think we have to think about a lot of things you mentioned about what's happening with the students themselves, as well as the parents and the isolation and all those things. But it's also as testing begins to, you know, increase and how people are being tested, what are the barriers, those kind of things. So I think that we have to begin to think more directly about the insurance of our children, and families, and how we access the system on the healthcare side. So if anyone wants to comment on that now, or if that's something you want to make it thought provoking, you want to think about it for future, but I think that's a important factor that we shouldn't leave out.
Thanks for that, Broderick. So folks are aware Supplemental Health is the agency that is contracted to do school nursing. They do have nurses in the schools. They've been available at community school sites that are doing food service for folks to be able to access meals and food. There are several school-based health centers as well, but there are some gaps there. I think that we have Dr. Cameron, who's one of our newest medical co-directors. I don't know, Dr. C, if you have anything to comment in regards to that.
Well, the comment is that our contract has not been signed yet. We were supposed to start July 1st. So supposedly it's sitting on someone's desk somewhere. So we have not officially been consulted about this. We did have some conversation with BPS administration regarding where our school-based health centers fit into this, because we do have 7 of them. That's only in 7 schools, but we really need to see the plan that Supplemental has for the entire district before we can figure out where our school-based health centers actually fit into that. And again, we're still waiting on the contract in order, for the whole school system to be medical directors, in order to advise them on a lot of this. So that is all kind of mysteriously on hold.
All right, thanks for that update. And thank you, Broderick. Of course, big issues to still work through. I believe I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Grace Tate, to move us toward our breakout groups. You'll have about 15 minutes there to dig into these issues, and then we'll come back and have an opportunity for a final word from our speakers and some extra information too. But Grace, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. Good afternoon, everybody. So now we want to hear a little bit more from you and get your opinion on 3 questions that we'd like you to ponder and give your opinions on, and then we will board out the session at the end. And as Andrea said, we have about 15 minutes to do that. So if we can spend maybe 4 minutes a question or so. You'll find yourself being placed in one of the work groups. Are we going to have 3? Are we going to have 3 groups? Not really.
We're going to have 5 groups. We have
5 groups. Okay, so we'll have 5 groups. So we'll need quite a bit of time to hear from all of the 5 groups. But the questions are: what stood out or surprised you in regards to what our speakers shared this afternoon? What do you see as the biggest needs in Buffalo related to schools and the education policy? And then what should we as a community be prioritizing to ensure equity and family-centered approaches? So I'm going to ask that we begin to move into our working groups and begin tackling these questions. Thank you.
That was like right mid. Thanks, Allison. If you back.
Did everyone get knocked off?
We got bumped back into the room.
Yeah, we should.
Okay, so everybody, no, but I'm saying in your private sections, in your individual group, did you all get knocked out?
What you mean knocked out?
Whole Zoom.
We totally crashed. Our whole group.
Oh, no. We went all the way to the end.
Yeah, we
No, as Megan was saying, no, we crashed out. We never got to question 3 or anything. It just died on us.
Technology.
So we're still trying to get folks back.
Yes, this is what it will be like and has been like. So this, we do our best with these platforms, but it doesn't always work. Thanks for your persistence.
Yeah, Andy, it's nice to see you back. Thought we lost you forever, but you were out in spite.
I was worried.
I was worried.
Somewhere, yes.
But we should all be back now. Grace, if you want to walk us through, we had 5 groups giving us perhaps just their one key takeaway. And then we encourage folks to type into the chat other key thoughts that came up. We'll share the chat with everybody who's participating today as well.
Well, that's great. So our first question about surprises. Let's just go right through the groups, starting with someone that's going to report out on group 1. And again, we're going to share the most significant surprise that your group came up with.
I think we might have been group 1. Is that right, Dina? Well, we'll just go ahead. In terms of what stood out, I think that that it's really an integrated problem, and we need to mobilize and share one message right now, and express that it's urgent.
Mm-hmm. And group 2?
I think I was group 2. But we said that nothing was really surprising, but rather disappointing, because it is really the same people in the same spaces raising the same concerns, and there's no changes being made, or very little, very slow changes being made.
Okay. Thank you for that, Nicolita. Group 3.
We talked a lot about how much we liked hearing the context, the history of parent advocacy, and we're both surprised, discouraged, and excited about how far and or not far the work has come.
And group 4?
Again, the team can chat into comments as well if I miss them, but I'll summarize ours by saying, like Dr. Bryant's point about, there are a lot of challenges, but opportunity for more personalized individual interaction, and especially like we talked about the individualized homes and the students themselves, and especially around families with children with disabilities and special needs, and making sure that it is inclusive.
Thank you for that, Michael. And group 5.
A lot of folks in our group were seasoned, so there wasn't a lot of surprises, but some reminder of what Sam had shared, that a lot of the teachers and folks that work in our schools are a different demographic than our families, so we really need to recognize to make sure that there's community and cultural competency in our approaches.
Excellent point. So our second question, what do you see as the biggest needs in Buffalo related to schools and the education policy?
And Grace, with the clock ticking, might we ask you to combine questions 2 and 3 now and have the groups give their main
when does the session end, if I may ask? I probably should know.
5:30, 10 minutes.
5:30, I think they ought to give all of them. We only have 10 minutes left. So yeah, if you can just give all of the remaining feedback for your group, I think that would be the most expeditious way to handle that. And I'll just, once again, what are the biggest needs in Buffalo related to schools and education, and what should we as a community be prioritizing relative to that to ensure equity, family-centered approaches? Group 1. Take it away, Renee.
Parents need to be heard and it's actionable, and that we need to interact with families using the tools they're using, not force them to use the tools that we want to use.
Great.
We talked a lot about data and how we collect data, moving from this like individual response method to really a collaborative and collective approach, especially when it comes to responsibility of how we might do outreach or how we might do data collection, and moving from that it being this like do-gooder individual person doing all of that outreach to really having it be the responsibility of the education system.
Thank you.
Money, trust, and transparency.
It's very succinct and well put. Group 4.
We wanted to be careful of one-size-fits-all approach, that homes have different resources and there's different needs at the individual level, even with students. The digital divide, childcare were also brought up. The implementation of current policies with fidelity and fully resourced, a lot of things around adequate funding, access, all voices being heard, individualized learning. And we did have a question come out that Allison was trying to answer for us at the very, and again, just keep chat in anything else like this.
Great. And our last group.
I think one of the major themes was aligning public health and public education in this moment. We need to use the policies that we already have and really work to align those sectors to make sure that our kids are, and our families and our community are healthy and safe, and our kids can learn in some capacity, even if it's a very different time.
Great. And there are a lot of good comments being added to chat. We encourage you to continue to put any thoughts that you'd like to share or your opinions. Please use the chat to do there. And there are several resources there that are very valuable that will be shared with the group as well. So I'll turn it back over to Andrea.
Thank you so much. So thank you again to our speakers for joining. Before we turn to Jessica, Dia, and Sam, who might need to run, I think, so feel free, Sam, to give their kind of last thought, closing word. I also want to turn it over to our partner, Michael, who will share about the Freedom Schools initiative that has been mentioned a couple times here as a new initiative to really fill some of these gaps around student and family engagement at this time.
Thank you. Yeah, just real quick, I know we're running out of time, but our Freedom School initiative, we're very excited. And I'm going to put into the chat as well. We have a survey.
He's on mute.
You got muted somehow, Michael.
Okay, my bad. Sorry about that. Yeah, so just our Freedom School initiative is an emerging multiracial collective of frontline organizations, community educators working toward justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, inspired by our local Haudenosaunee teachings and the Freedom Summer of the Civil Rights Movement and a framework of liberation and social justice education. We organize ourselves and our communities from a place of strength, healing, and resilience. And we started an initiative. We're kind of building it as we go. This collection of our organizations working together, many of the same that are here with Anchor, and have started a Freedom Friday session. We had our first session with youth last week. We have another one coming up this tomorrow from 11 to 12. And I don't know how to put this, I think somebody could put the link out there to join that, but we are co-creating it with the youth themselves. We want to hear their voices, what their needs are, and offering a lot of what we think also was important for us growing up as youth, what was needed in terms of the social justice issues that we're facing today. But we are co-creating it, and we do have the survey that I put out there for youth serving organizations to contribute what you're doing around the youth. Asset mapping, but we can take it from there and building on this movement. It's really a movement, not like a building per se, but it's a movement that's inclusive and holistic and trying to expand and liberate minds and to empower our youth, and more particular to move forward in a more just and equitable way in our communities and our homes and our society moving forward.
Great, thank you so much, Michael. And with that, thanks all of you for sticking with us this long on a Thursday afternoon, and we will give Jessica, Sam, and Dia the opportunity to just close us out with a closing thought or word each, please. Jessica?
I'm going to let Sam go first in case he needs
Great.
to.
Yeah, I just remind of us that no one of us is as smart as all of us, and that us hearing from each other is really important. But I want to just say this in closing. We've already had a lot of significant policy wins. The wellness policy, code of conduct. We got policy wins, and so the new policies are important. But we got to get to the implementation of policy with fidelity and the funds to implement policy. So I don't want us to, get caught in I want to see if it go from policy all the way to practice. And so we got to finish some stuff too while we're looking to create some other stuff. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to make that be my closing statement. Thank you for having me, and, continue the great work at Anchor.
Thank you, Sam. So I want to echo and build on that point. We need to implement policy. We need to look at practice, good practice align with policy, and then we need to align programmatic stuff. So that needs to be more of a continuum. We can't just be working in one of those buckets. And then we have to have a mechanism in place. We talk a lot of times about good communication, coordination of what we have going on in all of our assets so that we can meaningfully collaborate. So let's work on multiple levels, top down, bottom up, across sectors, and create more spaces like this on behalf of our families. Over to you, Dia.
All right. I guess I will give one of my favorite quotes from Malcolm X, and it's about not being outnumbered, but being out-organized. And it is conversations like this that show that there is both interest and organization and synergy around our values. Monday, the New York Equity Coalition will release 5 big questions that parents should ask at the 20 parent meetings that are happening in Buffalo. I hope you see that as a resource. I hope you reach out for resources. Sam knows how to find me. Just Google and trust you'll find me. But we've always got resources, and we want to make sure that we can support your collective organization.
Great, thank you so much, Dia. We'll look for that on Monday and be sure to send it to all the folks here in this meeting. We'll send you a link to the video, to the chat, and other resources that have been mentioned, and feel free to share those with other contacts and parents and advocates as well. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. If you're not on the Anchor list already, by participating today, we'll start looping you into future meetings. And with that, be well. As Jessica said in the chat, stay involved, stay encouraged, and be well in the uncertain days ahead.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.